So hello, everybody. This is a great day for us at NORAC. I would like to extend a few words of welcome on behalf of Moira Fall. She is the Executive Director of NORAC, and I'm the Academic Director, and we together lead NORAC. It's a very revered and old institution in the field of development and education, with a commitment to the Global South, giving voice, amplifying expertise of the Global South, and with the unbroken commitment to equity and quality and inclusion. So my role is to tell you how this line of work fits into the overall NORAC scope of work. And we have 4 different threads, 4 different areas. And one of them is private sector approaches. The first one is on data and evidence. And as I said, it's always on equity, quality, and inclusion. So when we talk about data and evidence, we actually focus on those that are excluded, those that are not counted, and those that are not accounted for. Education and SDG, here we have a lot of intersectoral work, education, SDG 4, but also its connection to SDG 8, to health, to gender, what have you. The 4th, innovations and disruptions, has a whole host of activities and projects, including the large KICS project, which is GPE funded. We are the hub for 21 countries in Europe, Asia, and the Pacific, and some countries of the Middle East. And the one that we are presenting today is private sector approaches. And there are actually 3 big projects within private sector approaches. And in all of them, Dr. Arushi Terwe has been the project director from the start, when we started in 2017. The first one, we kicked it off with philanthropy and education. And our brand in this is to say there is such a thing as, of course, there is regional philanthropy, and we should take regional philanthropy serious. So we had regional conferences in different parts of the world. The second big initiative is this one that our group is presenting under the leadership of Arushi, with strong support of Marina Dreux, but also Marina and Catherine Manuel, and 7 universities altogether, but Catherine will tell you all about it. And the third one, you will hear about it, I would think, on Thursday, is a new project. It's called Transform. It's an applied research project that looks into innovative financing. And you will hear a little bit about it, I think, on Thursday, about the third project, which is a research project. These are the things that I was just mentioning. So this one that you are experiencing today is the one that is funded by Swissuniversities. The one that we are developing right now, and we are almost there with the actual content. And Archana Mehendale has been very actively involved, is an executive education program, and we do it in collaboration with UNESCO IIP Paris. And the third one is this research project. We refer to it as Transform. And this one is, again, with the focus on equity, trying to understand innovative financing in the larger picture of what the opportunities, but also challenges are with being inclusive when it comes to innovative financing. And in addition, this group provides expertise on private sector engagement. We are actively involved in all kinds of activities that broker knowledge and that link policy and practice. So for instance, we have been also actively involved in the Abidjan Principles, which is all about ensuring equity to education. Okay, I have said enough. We have a long program, so I should pass the floor to Catherine, who will say a few words about the actual project. And again, welcome on behalf of Moira and myself to this NORAC event.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome. It's great to see so many people joining us today. My name is Catherine Magno, as Gita said, and I'm a professor at the University of Fribourg in Switzerland. And my role in this project was as something called head of COFER. And I'll explain what that means in the context of the project's funding. The Innovative Finance for Education project was supported by a mechanism in Switzerland called SUDAC, and that stands for Swissuniversities Development and Cooperation Network. Generally speaking, SUDAC aims to help higher education institutions contribute to meeting sustainable development goals. And within SUDAC, programs called COFERs were funded to encourage Swiss institutions of higher education to work on global issues together with partner institutions in the Global South in order to increase efficiency of North-South partnerships and to enhance the excellence and innovation in both education and in research. So COFER stands for Consortium for Education and Research. And as you now know, our COFER focused on the issue of innovative finance in education. So each COFER has a head, and in our case, as head of COFER, I acted as really as the financial and structural liaison between Swiss universities and our COFER's partner institutions. Altogether, Swiss universities supported 10 COFERs on topics ranging from climate knowledge and climate change to water and sanitation issues to science action in schools. I should also mention that in a second step, as a second set of programs, Swiss universities funded something called CLOCs, and these, we as IFE, as the Innovative Finance in Education COFER, participated in one of the CLOCs. These are clusters of cooperation that focus on networks within geographical regions as opposed to issues such as IFE that act across geographical regions. So IFE is part of the South Asia CLOC, and that is ongoing. So I'm proud to say that we achieved all of our goals and in the project, and I'll just briefly summarize the consortium's accomplishments. First was thorough, systematic literature review, which is not only rigorous, but also very interesting to read. I highly recommend it. It was published on NORAG's website and is in development as an academic journal article as well. A curated webpage was produced to disseminate state-of-the-field information on innovative financing in education. 6 in-depth multimedia case studies from real-world experience were published on NORAG's website. They're from India, Argentina, Ethiopia, South Africa. I believe more in development, and Arushi is going to talk to you more about those and our other colleagues. 16 or maybe even more short desk-based case studies were produced and published on the website, and multimedia teaching materials, including animated videos on various topics within innovative financing and education, as well as PowerPoint lectures and other materials were developed. Nearly 20 lectures and workshops and conference presentations were delivered by our team members, and an MA level course on innovative financing for education was taught at the Graduate Institute by Dr. Turway recently. So I guess I'm probably close to the end of my time, and I just want to end on a personal note to say that I began this project as I would call myself an innovative finance skeptic. I knew only the basics of education finance itself and knew nothing at all about innovative financing instruments. So I'm very grateful to my IFE colleagues across all of our partner institutions for not only exposing me to this area of international education and development, but also for convincing me of its relevance and importance today and into the future for education. So as head of COFER, I was in the lucky position of both learning about IFE and also having the pleasure of reporting on our outputs and successes to our funder, Swissuniversities. So I'm really looking forward to hearing even more today and on Thursday and joining in the discussions with you all. And I hope you're equally inspired by our team members. So on that note, let me pass the floor onto what my colleague and an expert in the field of innovative finance and education, Dr. Arushi Turway. Thank you.
So welcome to our event on innovative financing for education. We have done a lot of work in this area, but what I wanted to emphasize, is that it's been a learning journey for this entire team. So what I'll be presenting at the moment is what have we learned up to now. The research project is not over. We'll be continuing to work on this, but I just wanted to introduce what we have learned up to now and then introduce the topics for later. To begin with, I want to show you a video that will expose you to the topic to a very small extent, just to get your brains going.
Can investors use their money to support social development while also having some financial return? This is what impact investing aims to do. Social impact investments aim to achieve specific beneficial social or environmental effects in addition to financial return. Investors in this market include philanthropic foundations, high net worth individuals, financial institutions, companies, and development finance institutions. Impact investing may take the form of different financial instruments and may result in many outcomes. For example, investors could invest in an edtech company that offers technology-based teaching materials like an educational app. For example, this investment could be done by buying shares or offering a loan to this edtech company. Like in other traditional investments, the investors expect financial return. However, with impact investing, the investors are often willing to have a smaller financial return, which can be below the market value, as they are also looking for social return, such as improving children's literacy. The main goal of impact investing is to use investment capital from private sources to fund initiatives that can have positive social results. In the case of education, social impact investments could support ancillary services and projects and complement traditional financing. Interested in improving education financing? Visit our website to learn more.
So I wanted to start with that video just to introduce the idea of innovative financing. Social impact investing is one type of innovative financing. You might have heard similar terms like social finance, impact bonds, venture philanthropy, microfinance, crowdfunding, debt swaps, all these different terms that we consider innovative financing. When we started looking at this topic in about 2017 and then really embarked on the journey of research in 2018 in this area, we started with all of these terms and tried to figure out what is the crux of all of this. There was an entire dialogue going on about finding alternative financing for education beyond traditional donor financing and national education budgets, where to find new financing for education. And what we figured out was that these terms are actually funneled into a similar concept. So all of them are working towards a similar aim of bringing in more and better financing to education. Innovative financing is used in multiple fields, but we are focusing just on education here. And what we realized, and we then defined it clearly for our research work, is that innovative financing, in very general terms, is some kind of a creative financing structure or arrangement that facilitates the movement of money from the funders over to implementing partners or governments or beneficiaries, with the purpose of raising additional funds from either new or existing sources of financing and maximizing the efficiency and effectiveness of existing money. So that's how we're trying to get to more and better use of financing. So we, in the COFER project, started working with multiple partners in Switzerland and in 4 countries around the world, Argentina, China, India, and South Africa. And in our new endeavors, we are also partnering up with implementing partners, which are UBS Optimus Foundation and Volta Capital. And we receive funding from multiple sources, but namely Swissuniversities for the SUDAC project, and then SDC Education Unit, and also the research desk, especially for the new project we are starting. So what did we find out? So the research in innovative financing, we conceptualized mainly from this systematic literature review we did. And we found this story within the existing research in this area. In the early days, which is late 2000s and earlier years of this century, everything was in a conceptualization phase. So there were lots of idea papers, concept notes written, and then from that started some proof of concepts and pilot projects in 2013 or so. And a lot of the literature that existed at that point were mainly written from practitioners as ideas, and then some from academics looking at the theory of why innovative financing from different sources could work or could not work or could deal with education challenges. Then came about research studies that were very academic case studies or case critique on how innovative financing is working, which problems they are tackling, and which problems they are even creating in some situations. In our project, we tried to move that conversation a little bit further by trying to understand the experience of implementing innovative financing mechanisms, all different sorts of them. And these were the process case studies that our purpose was that we wanted these to be used as teaching case studies. And this is where we explore a lot of stakeholder relationships. And you'll be hearing about these case studies quite a bit today and on Thursday. And now we are seeing that the research in this area has to move to the next phase of testing the promise of innovative financing. If innovative financing is meant to bring more and better financing, how? Is that actually happening? So we need data and evidence to show how and where this is actually happening, or when in situations where it's not happening, in what context and what's really happening there. So we'll be moving on to that phase. So up to now, what we found out were that there's some common features of different types of financing mechanisms that we clump together as innovative financing. They don't all have these features, but there are some common features in the majority of them. They use private capital market, not all of them, but a lot of them. They have business-like approaches in management of programs and financing. They focus on results. These are results-based financing mechanism, and Marcus and Bettina will be showing a case study of that. It invites new actors to get engaged, especially financing actors like philanthropies, private investors, development finance institutes. And with all of this, they try to have a financial solution, a financial structure to solve education challenges. And any practitioner who's implementing this, you can ask them, they don't claim to solve all education challenges through financing, but they're saying the problems that can be solved with education financing, let's explore that a bit more. Those are some common features. So what we found was that this was emerging mainly from this dual push from the public side and from the private side. On the public sector education side, there's continuously a gap for financing all the national and global goals that we have for education. And there's a perspective that there's low efficiency and efficacy in spending the money that's already there. And there's a trend going along with that of new public management, so a lot of business-like practices being introduced into public administration. On the private side, there's a recognition that education services are in high demand. There's an actual market for it for private actors to enter. And that there are potential consumers in emerging markets that private actors could be reaching out to. And along with that, now companies want some kind of alignment with SDGs. Shareholders are actually holding them accountable for sustainable development goals and socially responsible business practices. With the increase of money and high net worth individuals, there's also an increase in philanthropic funding and corporate social responsibility type of funding, which we've seen a pattern that take any country, a lot of that, a giant proportion of that is actually going towards education. There's interest in that. So these two sides kind of come together, and innovative financing mechanisms allow them to take care of these interests by sharing costs between public actors and private actors, sharing risks, sharing returns, which is both social returns, which is educational outcomes and impact, and financial returns, and to share the responsibility of provision of education to our children and youth. This is where the whole field is emerging from. The rationale for using innovative financing for education from literature and from the case studies we have done, what we've seen is there's a discussion. These are all at conceptual level at the moment. We don't have a lot of evidence for this, but at the conceptual level, it's about improving education financing by both increasing the revenue sources for education services, but also changing how the money is spent, changing the expenditure. Reforming how states function, education management functions, and then through that changing how education services function. And then this is a very small portion, but there is a conversation about income redistribution through innovative financing, where the logic is that for areas that market can take care of, private investment could take care of, profit-making industry could take care of, let them do that so that money, public money, is freed up for services where there's no easy market for it, so that we actually redistribute the income and taxes through that. There are lots of limitations and challenges already identified in this. The biggest thing is that there's currently very little empirical evidence that shows that innovative financing mechanisms are actually bringing in more funding to education, or that on their own, just the mechanism itself is more effective or efficient in using funding. Then through research, literature that already existed and the case studies we did, we found that there's a big gap between the conceptualization phase and the operationalization or implementation phase. It takes a long time to develop these models and then implement them. And what is implemented may not look exactly the same as what was envisioned in the beginning. And then there's controversial discussion going on about the role of private sector and private actors. There's a diverse group of private actors, and they play different roles and have different interests, and there's no agreement or clarity about what they're meant to be doing or any standards about that. And for NORAG, what's most important is to recognize the missing pieces in the dialogue on this topic. One thing that is not often identified is that there are structural and political causes for underfinancing of education. We keep talking about the gap in education financing, but there's very little recognition of structural and political reasons for why education is underfinanced. There is a group talking about tax reform, which is extremely important, that we do need to make sure that tax funding is maximized for national budgets and used for education. So there's a whole discussion about tax justice in this area. And then there's what we're finding is that there's no actual agreement on the purpose of innovative financing. Everyone uses a different reasoning for why they're doing it. And then where we are trying to move forward is stakeholder capacity building. We are recognizing that education and finance professionals don't always have the knowledge that is needed to heavily engage with designing and implementing these projects. They're all new structures need to be formed, and for that, everyone needs to have the base knowledge of how financing works on the education side, and for finance professionals to understand what education challenges exist. So today, I'm going to pass it on to our other researchers from the consortium who will give you presentations on different case studies that we've done. I will later on introduce all the projects that we have done on this topic. Okay, So let me pass it on to Marcus and Bettina.
Yes, hello everyone. Hello colleagues. I hope you can hear me. Yes, wonderful. So good once more. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening also from our side, from the side of Bettina and myself. I'm a professor of vocational education at the Zurich Zurich University of Teacher Education, and Bettina is the head of education, employment and jobs at Helvetas. Good. So today, Bettina and myself, we are presenting you a case study that looks at a project implemented and designed by Helvetas in Ethiopia. And the focus there is really on result-based financing. It's a special case of result-based financing. RBF it's focusing on vocational education and training. And it's been the basis for this presentation is a case study report that has been produced by a number of people, number of researchers based at the Zurich University of Teacher Education, and also colleagues from Helvetas. You can see the reference for this on the very last slide here. Good. Before we talk about the example of Ethiopia, first of all, what is it about result-based financing in education and training? I think most importantly, the idea is that funding is not directly given to providers who would then organize some kind of education and training program, but it's really RBF is a financing arrangement in which some payments are contingent upon the achievement of predefined, verified results. So there is a relationship always between a service provider, you can see this here on the right-hand side, and an outcome payer, which are in a first step making an agreement, a so-called RBF agreement. The service provider then starts the training and reports those results, verified results, to an outcome payer, and then it's always also only after this that a payment for results is being made from the outcome payer to the service provider. So that's roughly the idea. The key objective, of course, is to ensure that education and training providers focus on impact. And of course, impact, there may be different types of indicators. Very often in the case of vocational skills development, and our project, our case study will be from this field. Here, the indicators are very much about access to employment and income. Yes, so with this, I'm handing over to Bettina from Helvetas, please.
Yeah, also hello from my side. And yeah, Marcus, for us, it was quite a journey when it comes to results-based financing in vocational education and training. It all started for Helvetas in Nepal with the Employment Fund. I think that was more than 15, or even when I think back 20 years ago, we had a program there, vocational education and training, and tried out different modalities and also the third type of results-based financing, but really a very simple, small form. And then we got approached by another donor who said, well, that's interesting, but can you reach also really masses of young people, not just a few hundred? Can you really reach also a certain scale of really reaching young disadvantaged people? And so we said, yeah, we want to try and to adapt the modality. So we tested, modified, tried again, and we heard from Arushi, yeah, it's quite a way to go, really to try and to prove that we can train really masses. And in the end, the program, trained more than 100,000 young disadvantaged group people, and 90,000 were employed, and about 75,000 really gainfully employed above a certain threshold of income. But the way there is really a trial to adapt, to learn from it. And with this experience, we also thought, well, how can we also transfer it, profit from it in other regions? And you see on the map where we tried it as well and applied it, and always with quite some modifications to the local context. And that leads me to the case study of SKY, so Skills and Knowledge for Youth in Ethiopia, where this case study for NORAC about innovative financing was done. And in Ethiopia, if you look at the context, it's a country that has a very young population. More than 50% are under 24 years. And at the same time, we have also a huge youth unemployment in that country, with about, well, 30% for young women and a little bit less with 22% for young men. And in addition, also a high underemployment, which is not stated here. When it comes to the vocational education and training possibilities for these young people, well, there aren't sufficient ones for this large young workforce. And in addition, for the disadvantaged groups who often have not finished the mandatory schooling, there are very few possibilities. And that leads me to the program itself. The focus is really on unemployed, underemployed young women. And then with the social inclusion aspect, especially with special needs, like also single moms, for example, also that we wanted to reach at least 50% women, and also economically disadvantaged. To bring them into a training which is really oriented towards the market, because the ultimate goal is to bring them into employment. So that means that service providers do not only then provide the training, but they have also the obligation to guide the young people towards employment, to coach them, to have connections with associations, the private sector, and also to support them with entrepreneurship training if they opt more for starting their own very small business. So the ultimate aim was really then the wage employment, self-employment, a gainful income at least above a certain threshold, and we worked here with the minimum income, knowing that there are, of course, it's not much, but it's at least the minimum that is defined, and there are also then possibilities to further develop and grow. And on the right-hand side, you see also one trainee in furniture making and woodwork. That leads us then to how this results-based financing approach works in this program, and also in other programs we had with some modifications overall. So at the beginning, it's really the agreement with the training or the service provider, a contract, and then it goes into the training and ends with a skill test, which is an official independent skill test by the national authority, and in a few cases by the training provider where there was no skill test for a specific occupation. And that means regarding payment for results, we come here in, it's mainly at that stage the payment for the skills test itself, when we have the output, the result of a successful training that has been passed by a trainee, the graduation, but also in the case of SKY in Ethiopia, a small payment during the training. And this is always also a debate. In some programs we don't have it, in others we need it. It's first because quite in Ethiopia they had a huge challenge to finance the training and to come up with a quality training if they had no financing at all during the training. And the second is also, there is an assessment during that stage to look how is the quality of the training, and also to value that quality of training. If we go further then, the ultimate aim, the ultimate result is then, of course, the employment and the gainful employment above this threshold. And this is measured 3 to 6 months after employment. And in Ethiopia, we defined it then after some trials that it shall be after 4 months, as most have found employment within that period. And to have all these payments really for the results, it of course requests a very strong monitoring as well. And we see that also that at different type parts, we do that monitoring. Marcus, if you, yeah, thanks a lot. For the input, of course, who is then also selected. Then during the process, it's the quality of the training. When we come to the skills test, it's quite simple to look who has passed and has gotten an official certificate. While then for the outcome, it's checking the employment at that stage and this is done by an independent committee of governmental institutions. And finally, not part of the results-based financing, but 1 or 2 years later, we look with tracer studies how the achievements are. Well, just a brief insight about the first results. It's a much smaller program than the one in Nepal, but still we have about 4,000 graduates and 3/4 are women who passed. The employment rate is with 84% really good and more women than men. So, and also more opt for wage employment than self-employment. But we see in the tracer studies that this also changes within 1 or 2 years, that some then later on with some experience try out also and want to enter into self-employment. Job satisfaction is high in that time, but one has also to consider that for 1/3 almost, the salaries are not really sufficient or attractive. So to develop further, and especially that's often then when they opt for self-employment to develop their own business. So that's about result-based financing in this example of Ethiopia. And of course, there are quite some challenges, quite some benefits about it, Marcus.
Thanks so much, Bettina, for this. Yes, as you have mentioned it, we are now going to briefly look at some benefits and also challenges in the implementation of RBF. On the benefit side, one aspect of this innovative approach is certainly that there is higher likeliness, somewhat higher likeliness for effectiveness by paying for the results. So not only paying for the conduction of training, but paying for the results, in this case, access to education, to employment and income. Secondly, there is also a clearer and more prominent outcome orientation of the provider, including the possibility to define very specific objectives at the outcome level. For instance, to say, well, we define the pricing on the share of females having access to jobs with more decent labor conditions, for instance. And there is also quite a high transparency of financial flows and of the impact reached. And I think that's also something that is particularly attractive for potential additional funders, thinking of funders such as philanthropical ones, as they have been mentioned by Arushi before. But of course, there are also a number of challenges that we have looked at. It is really challenging to define the payment metrics and the pricing system, one that is also aligned with the desired impact and also with the conditions of potential providers. So it's not always easy to define good and convincing indicators, the right kind of to define the right price and also the right timing when the funds are being paid. And as we have seen before, monitoring is really important, but to design cost-effective, meaningful verification methods, that's also challenging. Last but not least, with regard to benefits and challenges, it's really important to say that RBF does not directly lead to sustainable financing mechanisms. So it's really an aspect or an approach to increase the effectiveness and to build the trust among key stakeholders, assuming that with higher trust, you would also get more funding in the medium and longer term. Last but not least, some findings on good practices. So our study suggests that There are a number of important preconditions for successful RBF. So a minimum level of competition among training providers, but also a demand for labor in the market or self-employment. Then the design of funding schemes requires very clear agreements between the outcome payers and the providers in terms of what the results are supposed to be. It's also important that there are financial incentives to effectively foster social inclusion. So to define the target groups and to define well what the target groups will then be supposed to reach after the end of the intervention. And also it requires to design funding mechanisms according to the capacities of the training provider. So as Bettina has mentioned before, some training providers may lack funding, so they may need some kind of advance money in order to be able to start some level of training. And as always in training that focuses on socioeconomically disadvantaged populations, our study has also shown that training should be flexible. On evening, for instance, weekend classes, that it should build confidence for women through counseling and also guidance, that it should also particularly support training that is close by, so it's easier to access for those who are actually in need of training, and that training is not enough, but coaching and support to the beneficiaries in addition to actual training is particularly important as well. So with this, I'm giving the word back to Arushi and her colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcus and Bettina, for a great presentation. So we have a short break for questions so that we can start addressing some of the questions that came in the chat. We won't be able to address all of them, but we will hopefully have time to address more of them at the end, as well as we'll have a longer discussion. So first question that came up through different people actually is an interest in understanding whether there is any capacity building of the service providers, of the training providers. So we had Mara Erodi asking whether there are intents to build local capacities in this sense, and also Rafaela Kieran from EAEA Belgium asking whether learning providers are prepared for this new work approach and whether they're receiving enough guidance during the project. Marcus and Bettina, if you want to address that.
Yeah, with pleasure. That's an important part. When I remember back when we started, maybe I go back to Nepal. At the beginning, we said, well, it's the market. They should, they can prepare for it, and we measure the results. But with the time, we realized really how important then it is to accompany them. I mean, of course, when we began, there was quite some resistance. We had to find some training providers as role models because there is a risk, of course, for the training provider, quite a big one. And then also we realized we need to improve the quality. They could still place, but maybe not in all professions, and there was a limit to it. So we realized we really need to do, again, a little bit like the classical style, but it's definitely important to do capacity building, be it about the approach, be it also about curriculum development, being about training provision, and so on. And also about management, all that. So that's built in. Yes, in these programs in Nepal, but also in Ethiopia, that we do a certain capacity building. Yeah, on the a little bit to see who needs what, not for all the same, but there are offers. Yes.
Great, thanks, Bettina. And then maybe we have time to address one more question that came in the chat. That is from Feyenogra Abog, who is asking a little bit about the different roles in the process. So, who defined the payment metrics, targets, and whether this was agreed between all parties. And yeah, she's also asking if there is time for you to address how sustainability is thought of in this project as well.
Yeah, as Marcus pointed out, of course, a definition of the metrics, also the differential pricing system for social groups, all that is quite a challenge and also is a process. Of course, we could profit quite a bit from the vast experience and learning journey from Nepal in this program. And when we defined it, so we got their experience, brought them in as experts as well, but also defined together. We started in one city in Bahir Dar in Ethiopia and defined it together then also with representatives of the city, but also of the TVET agency in the region, the TVET bureau there in Amhara region, and also with associations to really sit together. And of course, there was a lot of skepticism at the beginning, which is also nicely described in the case study about it. And we really had to prove, to show the experience from Nepal, but also to prove then at site that it works and bring training providers on board. And we modified. It was not just in stone what we decided at the beginning, but we also coached the training providers and checked with them for feedback and involved them what to modify without losing the focus on the results. Of course, training providers would prefer modalities with payment as early as possible. But yeah, so it's a journey together with the private sector, with governmental institutions, the project team as well in Nepal, then strongly with the, of course, with the funders who came in. Mm-mm.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Bettina. Marcus, I don't know if you want to add something.
I think would be a lot more to discuss. So thank you so much for these questions. And well, it was a privilege to be able to present this here.
Yeah, thank you very much,
Marcus. Thank you, Marcus and Bettina. So I suggest we now give the floor to Marina Avelar, who will be presenting on the Zaya Learning Lab, which is a case study of impact investments.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm very happy to share with you some of the insights that we have had from this case of Zaya Learning Labs, or just Zaya, which is a case of impact investment. And this will illustrate quite clearly and very well what Arushi was talking about earlier. And it is exactly a case of the kind of investment that she presented in the video. And I think this will show us some of the challenges and nuances and how things happen in practice in a case when an organization is moving towards this kind of financing. So I'd like to start with where Zaya started, so the context and the problem. So Zaya is located in India. Their headquarters is in Mumbai, and they were embedded in this context of social inequality and a need to improve education. Just to illustrate this, in 2015, considering 8th grade students, 25% of them could not read at the level of second graders, and more than half of them could not do a simple text of division. So there was an issue in education there that demanded different kinds of strategies and initiatives. And Zaya was also embedded in this growing ecosystem of impact investment. And India was emerging and is growing as the world's EdTech laboratory. And EdTech, we understand just as educational technology, considering both hardware and software to improve education from the teacher side, so the instruction, the kinds of activities they can do, but also from the side of the student, giving them tools to have more agency and have a better educational experience that all in all should result in better learning outcomes. So just one quick quote from one of the co-founders saying that they visited lots of offline schools and saw this real need for connectivity of how students did not have access to very good, very productive content that is online that they could not have access to because of lack of internet or electricity or teachers that were not trained to do that. So that's why they decided to work with providing technology solutions to schools. At first, they decided to go with a more traditional route. Let's say they were a nonprofit organization that developed and offered technology products for low-income schools and organizations. And they wanted to really address the most vulnerable students by going to low or no internet connections. And in this case, they created, which was the main product that they had, which was this box that kind of created an intranet. So they did not need the external internet connection, and teachers could use different kinds of activities and apps and so on inside the school. And all of this should be used in a blended approach. And blended approach, if you don't know, it's when you try to combine face-to-face activities with a teacher or instructor with computer-mediated activities. And you can do stations where students go from one place to the other, or flipped classrooms where you do one thing and then before the interaction with teachers. So there are many ways of doing this, and Zaya was working with this strategy. Their initial funding was seed funding, grants mostly, but also some equity investment. And like I said, the whole idea was that technology could help teachers, could elevate quality, could reduce inequality. And embedded in technology, they were also working with teacher training. There was in-class coaching with people from Zaya that would visit schools and also offering consulting to schools. And this was focused on improving learning outcomes. So teachers could have tools to monitor progress, trying to address the issues of pupil per teacher ratios, and offer personalized learning for students. But after a couple of years, they faced challenges with financing. They thought that being a nonprofit was limiting their scope of work, and they figured that they actually needed a financial model that was more predictable, more reliable, and sustainable. And their main issue was not only because they were working with low-income schools and they were themselves a low-income NGO, but also legally, as a nonprofit organizations, they could not license the products they were developing and thus create an income, a source of income from those products. Therefore, they decided to shift towards impact investing. I could really describe this, but because we had the video, I will go very quickly through this. So it combines financial and social returns, but it's important to remember that it still has financial returns. So the organization that is receiving funding, they do need some kind of strategy to have their income and repay the amount plus interest. And it is supposed to mobilize resources from private investors to also create new approaches to social issues. And here, compared to, compared to other kinds of social investments and socially responsible investments, and like we said, there are many terms out there. Here, the social purposes, they are at the core of activities. Please go to the case and check this out. This clearly depicts the different types of investments that are out there, and it makes us understand those investments as in spectrum. So at one extreme, you would have the responsible investing that is just trying to avoid harm. And then at the other side, you would have venture philanthropy that all the focus is on the social return, but the financial return might not be there. They're willing to lose their money or perhaps just have back and break even, not have a profit on what they have donated and invested. And then impact investing, which is this case, is somewhere in between those two, really putting the social issue at the core, trying to find a service or product that will address it, while still having a revenue and making some profit out of it. Then Zaya, moving from a nonprofit to a social business that would benefit from impact investing, of course, created several shifts in how they worked in terms of the organization, their strategies, and their financial flows. The main thing is that they opted for bifurcating their operations. So Zaya itself moved from a nonprofit to a social business, and they created a new organization that they called Teacher Class that would in a way continue the work they were doing as a nonprofit receiving grants, but now as its own organization with a separate team and a separate accountability and so on. And they did this because they realized that there was a chunk of what they were doing, the most marginalized and vulnerable groups, they would probably not benefit, they would not be addressed with impact investing. So they still required grants and the more traditional way of doing social work in a way. So that's why teacher class started to operate in this context. And then Zaya moved to attract venture capital into EdTech to operate in primary education. And in doing so, they kind of created two novelties. So one, bringing about new money from venture capital. And then the other thing was bringing those solutions to primary education, because at the time, most of those products, they were focused on tertiary education. And this also changed many things on their daily lives. So they changed how they managed the organization. It changed how the team was made up. So they actually streamlined the staff and they outsourced some functions, focusing on people that would really develop the products and the solutions that they were working on. And there was this strong focus on efficiency and outcomes. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Again, you can check on the case and see this in more detail, but I just want to focus on the bottom part of the valley of death. Here is when organizations are not even breaking even. And when you're working with donations, you can stay in this place. But then to really attract venture capital and impact investors and so on, an organization needs to climb up and have a revenue. So more than break even, then continue to go up in order to attract those investors. And this is what Zaya was trying to do and is doing. So that's why they developed products for revenue since 2018, trying to formulate products that would have a steady income, combining consulting and the IT applications that they create. At the time that we wrote this study, Zaya was consulting for more than 8 clients in India and the US, and they were on board for 15 other clients in other places. To work with all of this and those investors, monitoring becomes key, and it concerns both social and financial aspects. So socially, making sure that they are reaching out the outcomes that are desired, and in the financial side, having a revenue in return as well. To do that, they have surveys, they have tests with pre and post intervention at the beginning and end of the year, and third-party evaluations. And on top of this, investors themselves, they usually have their own indicators and their own evaluations. And in the interviews, they mentioned that, especially concerning the financial side of things, they treat social businesses just as rigorously as any other normal businesses. Then finally, investors and beneficiaries, they become very active in the management. Then in a minute, just wrapping up challenges and lessons learned. People from Zaya, they report that it's really difficult combining social and financial returns, particularly when you're dealing with the most vulnerable groups. Searching for investors and attracting paying customers in practice is almost just as challenging as writing grant proposals, which is something that we're trying to run away from. So it has benefits, but it has also challenges, and it's not as easy as it may sound. And then finally, all in all, both Zaya and the investors, they mentioned that the most vulnerable populations, they can probably not be reached through for-profit endeavors. So it does require combinations. So that's it. Like I said, I'm here for questions, and please do read the case if you're interested in more details. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, for a great presentation on this case. So we already got some questions in the chat. Maybe I'll start with Tia Torelli from ETF, who is asking whether the initiative came from the public sector or from the private operator, or both, and whether there was an approval, and agreement from the public school system that was needed in the case of the Zaya operation. Marina?
Perhaps, oh, sorry, Marina is muted again. Okay. Go ahead, Marina.
There. No, please go ahead. I was going to say that you co-wrote the case, and yeah, go ahead.
Yep. I can attempt to answer that question. We studied Zaya slightly from a distance, so we have limited interviews with them. But from our understanding, when we did the case study, they were still only working in private schools, and for the most disadvantaged populations, they were working in low-fee private schools. And the biggest challenge they had was transitioning over to public schools because of lots of regulations that the government has posed and the types of licensing and permissions that they needed, they weren't really able to enter that. They were hoping that with this venture capital and a much larger scale of operation, they would be able to work directly with state governments in India and be able to enter the public school system. I hope that answers the question to an extent. We don't know all the answers there yet.
Great. Thank you, Ruchi. And then maybe as you had to rush through that a little bit in the end, Marina, do you want to expand a little bit on how on the transition of SAIA from a non-profit to a for-profit, the equity concern was taken, and then how this was addressed afterwards with these two SAIA arms that were built?
Yeah, so Zaya's case, I think it illustrates a solution that goes with hybrid approaches. And one of the solutions was to create a new organization that would continue the work that was solely focused on the most vulnerable populations. And in that case, they would not be concerned with having a profit and having paying customers and all of this. I think this facilitated, made it easier for them to continue their work with that. Because they did find paying customers that they would be from middle class or even elite schools, and therefore would not address the initial goal, right? So having this dual work, and in doing that, I think they could attract different kinds of donors and investors and maintain things working.
Great. So without further ado, let me then pass on to our next case study presentation, which will be on LEAP, which stands for Lending for Education Africa Partnership, and that will be presented from by Joseph De Silva from Volta Capital.
Hi, thanks, Marina. Let me share my screen. And while I do that, just to say, it's great to be here, and thank you to all the speakers so far. This has been extremely fascinating to hear all these different cases, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest. And very happy to be part of the conversation today. So just by way of a little bit of background, I work for Volta Capital. We are a development finance impact investing advisory firm, so we're not investors ourselves, but we help to launch and incubate the Lending for Education in Africa partnership back in 2018. So today I'll share a little bit about why we did that, what it's all about, how it's set up, and where we are to date. So essentially, the reason we launched, created this, was for a variety of reasons. So as we know, there's basically huge challenges for students who are seeking to study at the higher education level, both at technical, vocational training institutions, as well as universities. Basically, if you're a student from a lower middle income background, you have a few options for finance. Currently, you can look for a scholarship, which are typically very limited in scale, only provided for those with the highest need, or those with the highest achieving students. Government programs. So for example, LEAP right now operates in Kenya. Government programs, the Government Loans Board in Kenya is meant to provide loans to the whole swath of students in Kenya, but is unable to meet that need. There's huge gaps there, and that's become even more apparent during COVID, where government budgets are stretched, and more students need financing to complete or start their higher education. And then commercial loans are just out of reach for most students, especially from those in lower middle income backgrounds who simply just don't have collateral, family income to secure those. And even if they did, they'd be getting very high unaffordable interest rates. So that is all kind of the context for where LEAP comes in. There's also, on the other hand, quite a high return on investment, both kind of social return on investment for having more higher educated students out in the workforce, but also a private return, right? So as we all know, those of us who have been through universities or other training programs, if you invest money in your own education, your earning potential goes up, which is the case in Kenya where we operate as well. And so that's kind of the rationale for why LEAP was set up as a loan program rather than a scholarship, to create something that's self-sustaining, but also can help students to like plug these gaps in the system that otherwise there's no sources of financing there to provide. So LEAP is a revolving social lending fund. We provide affordable and customized loans to students who otherwise are underfunded or don't have enough funding to start or complete their studies. And so we are basically complementary in the market. We don't necessarily provide all the funding for every student. We're not there necessarily to support the most destitute, but we're there to fill these gaps for students. In particular, we see, for example, students who are partway through their studies, but through the existing sources of financing are at risk of dropping out or have already dropped out and deferred their studies just because they can't afford things like living expenses, right? A computer, things like that, in addition to tuition, which we also help to provide. In addition to this equitable access piece, we also focus on addressing the skills mismatch in the economy. So you hear from employers all the time that a big reason that they're not hiring new graduates coming out of universities is because they just don't have the right skills. They don't have the soft skills necessary to make them competitive and to make them appropriate for the jobs that are out there. And so we focus on, first of all, select number of kind of educational programs that are high demand in the economy. So right now we're focusing mostly on health sciences, but we also support ICT type of program, ICT programs, finance, accounting programs, and engineering. And we also provide a whole suite of wraparound student support services. So we don't believe that, as part of our theory of change, that it's enough just to provide a loan and walk away. You see that existing financing solutions that do that approach often have very high default rates and aren't sustainable. And so we offer a whole suite of things you can see here: financial literacy trainings, career readiness training and support throughout their studies and after they graduate, as well as facilitating linkages to employment, and building kind of this robust peer-to-peer and alumni network that our fellows can then interact and build that network up as they're in school and before they even get out. All those things that are kind of additional to what they get in their educational programs. And then, of course, after graduation, we continue to support them into employment, at which time they can repay, and that money can then be recycled to another student just like them, creating something that's more sustainable than a scholarship program or another type of financing solution here. So that's LEAP in a nutshell. Basically, LEAP operates with a partnership model, and you can see here all sorts of different partners we have. LEAP is managed by a dedicated team in Kenya that's now set up as a fully local Kenyan social enterprise. Bolta, our role has been as an incubator in the first few years, and now is basically on impact and performance type of support, fundraising, things like that. We also, you can see on the right side, we have a number of education partners where we're currently supporting students. So right now we have 950 students that we support across 5 universities, both public and private in Kenya, as well as 6 technical vocational institutions, many of those in the health field, as I mentioned. And then we have a number of strategic kind of partners that help us when it comes to employer linkages or the pipeline of students, to finding the right students and sourcing them, as well as operational partners who help us with our training provision as well. And then interesting for today's discussion, in terms of how LEAP is financed, we are set up as a blended fund. So what does that mean? That means we have both grant funding and impact investment that has come in to support the fund as we get off the ground. And as those of you know, that basically any education initiative is challenging from an investment point of view because the time horizons are so long, typically. So something like LEAP, in order to prove concept, we need to have fellows who have received a loan, gone through all of our trainings, graduated from their program, gotten to the job market, secured employment, and repaid fully. And that just takes time. And as we know, we've been in operation for 4 years, and now we have about 24 that have fully repaid and about 175 that are actually in the job market right now. And most of those have come in the past year or so. So to start off, we received seed funding from the UK government as part of a program called SPHERE, this Strategic Partnerships for Higher Education, Innovation and Reform. That provided grant funding for us to build our operations, get to proof of concept. And very importantly, they also provided first loss funding, which basically de-risked our portfolio and allowed us to make the case to other investors even before that may not have been ready to invest quite yet, because we're still getting towards proof of concept, but de-risked the portfolio enough that we got a substantial investment from USDFC, which you can see there, as well as several other impact investors who have invested in LEAP. So essentially that initial grant funding has leveraged private capital and credited in at a rate of up to 4 times the initial amount they put in. So that's a good example of how you can use kind of different types of finance to bring in new sources to fund something like this. So where are we right now? I mentioned some of this already, but essentially across the bottom, you can see the kind of demographics that we've supported of students. And so we're providing access to, obviously, students that are predominantly from low-income backgrounds. Half of them are the first in their family to attend higher education, and the great majority say they were at risk or dropping out, and actually like a quarter of them had already deferred studies or dropped out in the past as just a result of not having enough financing. And I think, just to give you a sense of the benchmark rates, in Kenya, about 27% of university or higher education students across the board are from the bottom 3 wealth quintile. So we're about triple that. And those from the top quintile enroll in universities about a rate about 13 times higher than those from the bottom wealth quintile. So that's really kind of the access piece we're trying to solve here. You can see gender on the right side. We could spend a whole day on that. We've done a lot of work on gender. And so just to briefly comment on that, because that is lower than we'd like in terms of our reach to female fellows, but we did a detailed analysis of that. And essentially the reason is it's a pipeline issue that we've mostly supported STEM programs to start. And so the applications coming in are very skewed male. Now that's been changing recently. We've been supporting more and more nursing programs, for example, and programs with in the health sciences degrees, which are more heavily female. We also secured grant funding in 2022 to actually do a more detailed marketing outreach strategy for our gender approach, which we're really looking forward to see which ways we can influence that as well. Now, something that's not on here that I'm sure that people are curious about is about employment outcomes and how are our fellows actually doing. So I'll comment on that. I think, as I mentioned, it's still early, and most of our fellows that have graduated have come in the past year or so. So we're about 175 graduated fellows. Obviously, COVID had a huge impact on the employment market, on our fellows. To give you a sense, those that had graduated prior to COVID hitting, most of them lost their jobs or the first to go, the first in, first out. And so at the start of 2021, our employment rate was lower than 20%, very, very dire. We've improved that over 50% now, and that's improving by the day. So we're basically, for a couple of reasons, we're seeing our supports are working. We're seeing that the economy is improving. We're seeing that health sciences degrees in particular are getting government postings after long delays. And so we're seeing a strong linkage to employment there. And so that's really a focus for us going forward into 2022, is to continue building out those supports. We're planning to grow to about 1,300 fellows in the next year, and really monitor our portfolio, give the right mix of supports and linkages to employment to ensure that we get those employment rates up, and as a corollary to that, repayment rates. So that's the real thing that will be the test over the coming year, as we work to get to financial sustainability. So I think that I'll pause there, because I think I've hit on most of the top line things, although I know there's a lot more we could say about this. So I'm happy to take questions, any comments from everybody, and thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for a great presentation, Leap, and it's great that we are also hearing it from one of the implementers. So first question that we got is one quite direct one from Genza Jan Tertino, which is sorry that if he missed it during a presentation, Joe, but he's willing to learn what is the interest rate of the loans and the payment framework and time.
Yes, great question.
Yeah.
So our interest rate currently is 10%. That's not set in stone, but basically that is meant to just cover operational expenditures. So LEAP is set up as a not-for-profit, and the very concessionary repayments to investors. And to put that in context, the Higher Education Loans Board, the government program is 4%, and that's loss-making. I think inflation when we started was something like 8%. So it's not, it might sound high in a Western context, but not. And the commercial loans, I think when LEAP was kicked off, were around like 18%, something like that. So that gives you a sense of where we are. In terms of repayment terms, our goal is to keep the debt burden lower than 20% of the expected salary, and for our fellows to be able to repay within 5 years. And so we cap our loans. We won't give, like we've had examples of students who are in very expensive private universities, for example, from very, very low income backgrounds. And that's not a good fit for LEAP, is what we found. The last thing we want to do is overburden. So we're trying to find that balance between social impact and financial sustainability is kind of always the push and pull with LEAP as we set this up. So I hope that answered all the pieces of the question.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe another question on the repayment options that came from Malshri Kangwar from the US, was asking how are the repayment options offered to students who get employed? Does LEAP offer innovative repayment options such as income dependence options, or what happens to repayment if the student is unable to get employment upon graduation as well?
Also a great question. So now, and this is another rabbit hole we can get down for another day, but there's all sorts of different models out there, like income share agreements, income contingent loans, et cetera, and like different permutations therein. LEAP it doesn't ascribe to any of those models per se. LEAP is a straight loan, although the way we've done this is that every loan is customized and bespoke. And so essentially what we've seen, so if there are fellows, and we've had cases of this for sure, who show a strong willingness to repay it and are, like being responsive and working with LEAP, exhibiting good behaviors, but just cannot repay as a result of not being employed, then we'll restructure those loans. And we've done that by extending grace periods, by changing repayment terms to basically make them kind of income contingent, right? We're not going to demand payment from fellows that can't pay because they don't have employment. And so we'll adjust those as needed. But then at the same token, if there's a fellow who simply disappears or becomes unresponsive, that's a different case. Right. And so not that that's happened very much, but so we kind of treat them on a one-by-one basis right now, and we're trying to refine the model. We found that like income share agreements, for example, which just for people that don't know, that basically says you don't have to repay anything as a student until you get employment, and it's capped at a certain level of your salary. We found that those are very interesting models, but typically it's difficult to do this across a lot of different types of programs like we support. They're usually very small and focused on kind of one education provider, and we wanted to do something that was more broad. And so we borrow elements of that, but we're not, so we're kind of a mix and match bespoke program, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Joe, for the great presentation and the responses to the questions. So I think it's now time for us to start hearing some reflections on all of these case studies and ideas that were presented here today. So I'll invite you to do that, Alicia Taylor, Herald Advisors, who's going to be doing some reflections on the field of innovative financing for education. Alicia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, afternoon, evening, and perhaps middle of the night for some participants. And congratulations to the NORAG team on all you have accomplished in this relatively short time to advance the field of innovative financing for education. And thank you for inviting me to offer these brief reflections. It's provided an interesting opportunity to look back on the journey thus far and the small role I played in coordinating and facilitating activities, advocacy, and early research on the topic. My first point of reflection actually is in the title itself of what I was asked to speak about, the field of innovative financing for education. So a field of study is defined as a branch of knowledge taught as an accredited field of higher education. That's my highly academic research on Wikipedia. and also as an area in which a certificate, diploma, or degree is awarded. And this is really the heart of my congratulations to Dr. Turway and the NORAC team. The continued exploration, analysis, and communications that you produce on innovative financing, and of course your collaboration with the Graduate Institute, SUDAC, and UNESCO IIEP is what even allows us to refer to innovative financing for education as a field in this moment. And that I don't think we should take that lightly. I was first invited to deliberate this thing called Innovative Financing for Education in late 2009 or perhaps early 2010, when the leading group on innovative financing for development established a task force to explore the implications and possibilities for the sector. At the time, I was with the Open Society Foundation's education program, and we'd been engaged in various partnerships with governments, the Global Partnership for Education, and other international organizations that illustrated the catalytic and supportive role philanthropies can play in unlocking financing and supporting systemic capacities to access and manage resources. The main focus and questions in that early discussion were, what is innovative financing, first of all? And then what is innovative financing for education? The main rallying cry and motivation in that moment was the annual funding gap for achieving global education goals. And at the time, that gap was estimated at $16 billion. When reflecting on this, I really did have to chuckle at remembering my initial shock and our shared assumption that that number was big enough to elicit a sense of urgency. However, we have seen how that number has exploded. And by the time even the task force issued its second report, just 2 years later, the estimated funding gap had already increased to 26 billion, and it continued to increase to the current level of 200 billion a year, given the additional strain of the ongoing pandemic and the strain it's placing on systems. So I believe, or at least hope, that we have learned that big numbers and gaps actually don't always motivate us towards coordinated action. In 2010, we didn't even have an agreed definition of innovative financing for education. The first efforts to outline what it means described it as a nascent area of inquiry. And the leading group distanced itself from the whole discussion in its own report on the topic. The document that, which was the first sort of global document on that outlines the field, the growing, burgeoning fields of innovative financing for education, was not even attributed to the leading group or its task force. Instead, the attribution was to the writing committee of the task force of the leading group. And then for further clarity, they included this statement that I need to read in its entirety, because it's actually quite unbelievable. Members of the group participated in their personal capacity. The views expressed do not reflect those of the institutions, organizations, or companies to which they belong. While none of the group members disagrees with the general thrust and approach of the report, none would either fully support or endorse each and every specific reflection or recommendation. And then an additional disclaimer for effect was the opinions expressed in this document are the sole responsibility of the writing committee. So just imagine opening a global report that you're trying to learn something about, and that's the statement that you read. Basically, like, we're not too sure about this. So I was a member of the writing committee, and remember how jarring those comments came across. They highlighted the tension, or perhaps contention, that arises when issues of increased private sector engagement in funding public systems would come up, or the education sector is described as a market and learners presented as consumers. And the tension is rightful, in my opinion. It was at the time a very polarizing debate, even within the individual organizations that were involved, including my own. The 2012 report was at least deemed an international expert report and had a much milder disclaimer. That was a welcomed and palpable shift. More significantly, the rallying cry expanded beyond the funding estimate to include the need to mobilize action to advance equity and innovation in the sector and to ensure the most marginalized are able to access quality learning opportunities. The big scary number this time was not the funding gap, but the number of out-of-school children, which was 67 million at that time. Partly in response to the polarization and in an effort to diversify the voices and perspectives that shaped what would later become a field, In 2012, I created a one-week summer school course at Central European University that ran for 5 years, and it was called Innovative Financing for Education, Arguments, because I wanted to focus on that, Arguments, Options, and Opportunities. The purpose was to bring together academics, practitioners, and policymakers from a diversity of contexts and institutions to debate, design, and consider the applicability of non-traditional financing instruments and approaches for the sector. In addition to the discussion of specific instruments, the course also surfaced debates on the long-term implications of private sector engagement in the sector, particularly as it relates to the ability of the state to ensure the right to education. It created an opportunity to work through obstacles to the design, implementation, and sustainability of various instruments and approaches, which were really nascent ideas in that moment, like impact investing and diaspora bonds for education. So again, it wasn't that the instrument was new, but we were looking at the application to the sector and the implications. More importantly than debating instruments and private sector engagement, we were eager to center the role of beneficiaries and communities in both the design of interventions and processes to improve accountabilities and monitor effectiveness of programs. Rather than an annual blow-by-blow at this point, because I'm only up to 2012, I'll just skip ahead to 10 years, and here we are in 2022. I have to say it's amazing to see the work of some of the course participants, including both students and faculty. Dr. Arushi Turwe has now become a leading scholar in the field of innovative financing for education. Instruments that were initially workshopped in the course, like Volta Capital's LEAP, which was an idea at the time, have launched and are delivering results, promising results. The reticence and polarization that used to plague early debates has decreased. And interestingly, the GPE now has its own dedicated innovative financing strategy and multiplier fund, which NORAC has prepared a short case study on. This fund recently launched a Smarter Financing Initiative, just to go back to big numbers for a moment. Recently launched a Smarter Financing Initiative, which is a $500 million fund and partnership between the Arab Coordinating Group, Islamic Development Bank, and GPE. This fund will allow the 37 countries in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, where 28 million children are out of school, to access new, flexible, and more concessional financing to address the learning crises. Again, not to be swayed by big numbers, the most exciting opportunity that the GPE's multiplier fund creates, particularly at the country level, is for increased engagement of philanthropies and other partners who do not typically directly engage in system-level interventions. The fund enables governments to leverage resources from their non-traditional partners to access funds matched at a 3-to-1 ratio for activities that may include scaling or replicating innovations and strengthening data systems and capacities. For me, coming from a foundation, this level of coordination is a welcome shift in the sector. This expanded table, so to speak, also includes more and more ministers of finance, a group that used to be absent from the tables in most global discussions on financing and resource allocation. So I've mentioned a few times that big numbers, unfortunately, don't tend to motivate us in ways that we expect, whether we are talking about a funding gap, number of out-of-school children, or the youth bulge that will strain education systems in years to come. So if not numbers, then what? What are the valid questions? What can motivate us? One question that has motivated me of late is, how are we coordinating to enable sustainable impact at scale? This focuses our attention beyond the need for resources to actual solutions and interventions, including how they are implemented and continuously monitored for effectiveness. The sector's refreshed focus and investments in data and evidence helps us in this area. Although those investments and activities are rather uncoordinated in the moment. We see research on evidence-based solutions, what works to solve problem X, best buys and smart buys. This focus on impact, though, also requires attention to power dynamics. Arushi identified earlier that welfare and income redistribution as one of the rationales and conversations behind innovative financing. And this is about power as an underlying factor that creates the inequitable conditions that we hold up to justify increased financing. It also focuses attention on questions of whose solutions are tested and confirmed, are innovations that are designed closer to communities, given the same investments and opportunities for scale and replication? Again, who is at the table? And I say this because as the instruments and processes to unlock resources are being defined, we need to also ensure that we are clear about how they can best be utilized in support of government's needs and goals in the education sector. When we speak of returns and equity, who is positioned to ensure accountability to communities rather than markets? And so I'll end here for discussion.
Thank you, Alicia. So let's hear some thoughts from Arushi as well, and then we'll have the time for a longer discussion. Arushi.
Thank you, Alicia, for that reflection. You've had more than 10 years of journey in this field. So we really wanted to hear from you to see where what we are saying is now a field of inquiry. So to continue on, I will try to not take too long so we have enough time for questions for everyone after this, but I wanted to quickly go through what we have done up to now in terms of research and what the future research agenda is, along with capacity building, capacity strengthening agenda. So very quickly, if you go on our website, you'll be able to find a lot of resources that did not exist on this topic before. So the systematic literature review is where we conceptualize the entire field, what has happened up to now in research in this area. So please go read that. It's about 40 pages, but very digestible, so read that. Then we've done all these in-depth case studies. Some of them you've heard from today, and some of them will be presented on Thursday. And one of the key things, and it's a question that kept coming up in chat, is that we selected these case studies on the basis of mechanisms that were trying to reach the most marginalized population. That was the promise of these case studies. Almost all of the mechanisms had special measures or special ways of reaching the most marginalized. For example, Zaya, you saw that they had that nonprofit arm to be able to do that. In Ethiopia, they actually paid more for reaching the marginalized population. So they were already trying to tackle those issues. Then we also have these short cases, which are 3 to 4 pages, descriptions of cases, and trying to tackle some of these controversial issues. And here we really expand, and we're not looking at just these typical private sector models. We try to look at tax justice issue as well. That's something that keeps coming up. Why are we looking at the private sector when we haven't maximized the tax base that is meant to be paying for public education? So we do try to tackle that as much as possible. There are 10 case studies up on the website right now, and there should be another 10 or so coming up in the next few months. Then we have mechanism animations like the social impact bond one that you just saw. These are educational short videos just to explain the basic structure of quite a few mechanisms. We haven't covered everything. It's a starting point. Over the years, we will try to make more and more of these. And then using all of this, we have created teaching materials that we have already used at master's level courses at the Graduate Institute and done a lot of guest lectures around the world. And we are also using that to develop this executive education course for education and finance professionals, which will be offered with IIEP with a certificate of advanced studies from the Graduate Institute. So all of that is the work that we've done, but there's a lot to come in the future because all of this has still left us with lots of outstanding questions. And I was happy to see that these questions were coming up in the chat as well. We don't know the answers to this. There needs to be a lot more research and evidence building to be able to answer these, not saying every model is good, engagement of private sector is good or bad. It's about the context, where they are working, what situation requires financial solutions. Not every educational challenge can be solved by financial solutions. So we're kind of tackling a lot of these questions in our next phase of research. So next phase has kind of started getting into really understanding the theory of change and concepts and testing them. So as I mentioned, we are doing this executive education course. More information will be coming. If you are interested in it, please do contact me or the NORAG contact us page on the website, and we will get back to you on that information. We have a major study on use of results-based financing to motivate subnational government level people and school administrators. This gives a big conceptual framework and gives practical recommendations for how to think about results-based financing for this middle level of education management and administration. It's about 100 pages because we looked at about 51 different projects around the world. We've given basic descriptions of each project, so that itself is rich information for anyone looking for practical information. But we will also add a practical guide to this so that practitioners can pick it up and think through how to design and implement results-based financing at this level. And then our new project, which is called Innovative Financing to Leave No One Behind, which is being funded by SDC's research desk under the Transform funding line. And that's what I wanted to describe a little bit right now. It's going to go on for the next 5 years. We have 3 research partners, obviously NORAG, taking the lead in conceptual design, and then Bertha Center at University of Cape Town in Cape Town, South Africa, and Center for Education, Innovation and Action Research at Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, India. We also have implementation partners who are the ones implementing mechanisms that we will be studying, which is Volta Capital and UBS Optimus Foundation. The main research agenda here is to really compare how innovative financing mechanisms stack up to traditional financing in reaching marginalized and vulnerable population. That's our main area of interest. So we're going to be doing a lot of comparative studies. The hypothesis that we are testing, and I do want to make sure everyone understands that we are testing. We're not saying this is what happens. We're trying to find evidence to see whether this hypothesis is true or not, and under what situations. The hypothesis is innovative financing mechanisms contribute to additionality in education financing. That is that they bring in more funding by using mechanisms and features like focus on outcomes, adopting private sector management principles, utilizing private capital market. And we're trying to see if this really increases the funding to reach SDG 4, especially the marginalized populations. So this is a much more complex theory of change that we will be testing. So these are on the left, the dark blue are the features of innovative financing models. The ones we'll be studying, not all of them will apply to each and every one of them, but overall, this is what the model is. Outcomes-based financing leading to effectiveness, private sector management leading to efficiency, innovative financing mechanism, just use of these mechanisms attracting finance from new partners, and private capital giving the ability for the programs to reach more beneficiaries than traditional financing would have. And all of this is meant to then improve or more and better financing for inclusion of vulnerable and marginalized population. Because we are testing this theory of change, we have actually included a counter hypothesis, which is coming specifically from major critique of introducing for-profit models into education service delivery. So we are also going to be testing the hypothesis on whether introduction of financial returns in education services leads to exclusion of hardest to reach populations. So we are very mindful of this critique, and we will be testing for this. The programs that we are going to include in this, because it's going to be a comparative study, we're going to be looking at LEAP that Joe just described, which is directly reaching to the beneficiary. So we are looking at this in a concentric model of different layers of which group innovative financing is targeting of education, administrations, and financing structure. So LEAP is going directly to the beneficiaries. Then we're going to be looking at financing that is provided to service providers who then reach the beneficiaries. So for this, most of the models we are looking at are impact bonds. Two that have been either completed recently or about to complete, Innovation Bond, Impact Bond Innovation Fund in South Africa, and Quality Education India in that has multiple service providers. And then at the larger level, we are also going to be looking at impact bond funds. So here it's a fund that then provides multiple impact bonds to service providers. And the programs that we will study under this will be announced in the next few months. So with that, I will stop the presentation and open the floor up for questions. Please go ahead and ask questions to any of the speakers. We are all here to respond.
Ruchi, thanks a lot for the great presentation, and also Alicia. Maybe we can start with a quick clarification question that came in the chat. So Janet Ba is asking, what is your definition of efficiency and effectiveness for this project?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I started reading the chat comments.
So we had a question asking from Janet Ba, asking what is the definition? How do you understand efficiency and effectiveness of innovative financing?
So they're always complicated to tackle. With effectiveness, I will really say it's about the results that were agreed upon by all the stakeholders, whether the program is actually reaching those results or not. So is it being effective? And normally, especially in impact bonds, where there are randomized controlled trial type of models, research models, monitoring and evaluation models built in, it's about whether the program is reaching it. What we are trying to see in our research is whether the program has the ability to reach those results due to the financing mechanism. So that's how we are going to be conceptualizing effectiveness. Efficiency, we still have to build a perfect definition for it, but at the moment we are looking at cost effectiveness. But here we are going to be looking at cost effectiveness in relation to full effectiveness. So sometimes it might be more expensive to do the innovative financing program. However, it might be able to reach more beneficiaries in the long term. So we are still working out that definition. We literally are launching this research project this month. So everything is in the early phases. Thank you.
All right, so maybe we'll give the floor to some of the comments and questions that came. Yes.
Hi,
ahead,
I wanted to ask if I
yes.
could actually respond to one of the, a couple of the questions. They're connected in the chat. Initially from Steve Cleese about the skepticism. And one of the reasons being that IFE is very small change compared to the need and outcomes measured. I just wanted to say, actually, I share your skepticism as well. And I think that IFE, while it won't solve the full problem or fill the gap, that it's still a very critical and important conversation, not just about the way in which it brings it could bring the potential to bring additional resources to the table, but also the way it brings, additional resources into the sector, but also the way it brings different people and constituencies to the table and starts to look at stakeholder relationships and the role of the state and private sector, and to identify the boundaries I think that we need to establish in the sector. So I think it's important for more reasons than just filling a particular funding gap. And then I think also the two questions that follow yours, I think also answer the question, reflect your question. I mean, Mark's comment or question about the percentage of military spending on weapons that would address the gap. I don't have the answer for that, but I know that it's a lot smaller than we would anticipate. Similarly, if the question or if the mission in the sector was to actually fill the funding gap, we wouldn't be talking about impact investing and specific individual initiatives. We would look at the base erosion and profit shifting initiative, which I think 5 to maybe 7, 8 years ago was very, it seemed to be growing in prominence. And I haven't seen anything even written about it in several years, connected to a movement that has gotten some traction, but unfortunately not as much traction as I think it could have. And I think it was reflected in both Keith's and Maria Ram Balsera's comments around tax justice. And so I think I think part of the challenge is that I think we need to move away from this either or, and even the presentation of innovative financing as a response to or a potential that can fill the entire funding gap, because I don't think that's the mission. And I think the research and analysis and advocacy has moved away from that.
Thanks, Alicia, for addressing that. I was about to bring up that question, so that's great. So I would suggest then that we give the floor to a participant that sent his comments in the chat. That is Rene Raya from ASP-BAE from the Philippines. Rene, would you like to share your thoughts with us early?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's now midnight in the Philippines. But yes, I really would like to share a lot of disappointments on innovative financing, as we have that in the Philippines. And the frustration about this is that while a lot of private schools are able to access funds from the public sector, it has been found even by the World Bank that these schemes are actually benefiting more the better off students rather than those who really are disadvantaged and those who are left behind. And thus, it creates even more and exacerbates inequity in education access. And I think many other examples in Asian countries, in Latin America, also experience this kind of disappointment about the so-called innovative financing, the PPP model. That's why we want to be critical about how sustainable, how does it really, strengthen the public education system rather than weaken it. In the case of the Philippines during the pandemic, and I guess in many other Asian countries, half of the private schools that have been benefited by public, financing for this PPP project folded up or stopped for the last 2 years, because they cannot maintain and they don't have to pay. They were not able to pay the teachers. They could not care about where the students will enroll. And so that's a disappointment about the performance of these beneficiaries. And so we want to exercise caution. We want people to be critical whether the projects can really be sustainable, whether it serves those who are farthest behind, and whether it contributes to strengthening the education system overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Rene. Arushi, Alicia, or any other presenters, if you'd like to react to that comment.
Joe, do you want to go?
Yeah, no, I was going to say I couldn't find where to raise my hand. I didn't want to interrupt anyone. No, I can quickly respond. No, I think those are all great points, and I think really interesting to hear from the context of the Philippines. I think definitely what we find across almost every higher education financing loan provision is that it benefits students from the higher income brackets. That's just been found across the world, just given they're more likely to reach that level of education, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the advantage of doing something like of LEAP is that it gives us a chance to experiment with some things and do things a little bit differently that the government perhaps can't. And we do work closely with the government. We've held multiple roundtables with the Higher Education Loans Board to talk through our model and what we're doing, and we intend to share those results as we go. So it's not like we're trying to do something to make money or to do something that won't benefit the system. It's quite the contrary, that we want to try to, our goal is to help students from the most disadvantaged backgrounds finance their education and get the same opportunities as everybody else. And it's not our program LEAP alone that will do that, of course. And so we're part of a system, we want to support that. But the advantage is just in means, what we find so often, and we've talked to governments in Tanzania and Uganda, et cetera, is just the means testing to figure out who we should be supporting. It's so difficult and insufficient and all that. Whereas something like LEAP, because first of all, because we're smaller, we're able to have this hands-on approach, we can do that more robustly and have a better assurance of who we're supporting. Now, is that something that's scalable to a national level? Maybe, maybe not. That's something we'll have to see. But I think there's going to be lessons learned there to address some of those points. And I think it's also about the types of programs we support. I think you're right, from a policy level, it is important to be careful about public funding supporting private institutions for all the points you raised. There could be a place for it, et cetera. But I think a big focus for us now is on the technical vocational side, where you have a lot more students generally are coming in with lower academic credentials or from lower income backgrounds, et cetera. So you're getting more of a pipeline of the type of students we'd like to help with this type of program, especially in the public institutions. So that's just a few things to say there. I think there's a lot more we could discuss on this, but yeah, really interesting points.
I might also pass the floor over to Bettina. Perhaps you can explain the combination of public and private institutions that were part of the SKY program, where innovative financing was able to make sure that the marginalized youth were being reached.
Yeah, I think it's really important to focus on the marginalized. That was this is the key point to discuss here, and we have in our program as well. So on one hand, to define and sit together with the governmental and also the public institutions and also the public and private training providers to figure out to really focus on this group. But that's not enough then, but to really set incentives, and clearly just simple financial incentives. We had 4 groups for people with special needs, women, then men, and then also economically disadvantaged people with several criteria to really focus on it. Then steered also especially towards at least 50% women and people with special needs. And that was really very clearly defined and discussed as well. And then also there were financial incentives to provide for that. So if these people were really then placed into jobs or into self-employment, into gainful self-employment, they received, and the training providers, an incentive for it. And other groups were excluded. So not anybody could be trained, which might have been much easier to place. So it was really a clear focus with 4 different groups.
Great. Thanks a lot, Bettina and Joe, for those responses. So maybe we have time for one last question. And that came earlier on from Mara Irodi, and I think that is a good connection to the next steps of the research. So Mara Irodi is asking whether there are already good evaluations on whether we are able to distinguish the effect of the program on desired outcomes or the effect of the financing mechanism. Arushi, maybe you want to address that one? Yeah.
I'll tackle this one by just saying, Mara, I think you might know better than I do, given your work on collating all the impact bonds that are around the world. At least in the education sector, we haven't come across one where there's a specific comparison of the financing mechanism. We've definitely come across mechanisms that are mechanism descriptions that are showing that a program is effective, but we don't know if that program would have been effective if they were financed through a traditional donor funding or public financing in general. So none that I know of.
Okay, great. So maybe we move to some closing remarks. Arushi?
Yes. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming and staying through the 2 hours. I know we presented a lot of information, and this is only a small amount of what we have done. Please do join us on Thursday, because we'll be specifically, we will be specifically talking about impact bonds. So everything is focused on impact bonds, and we'll be presenting a little bit more on the theory of change for the next project. So thank you everyone for coming. Please go on to the NORAC website on the IFE page to access the resources. It's all open source. Use it in your work, use it in your teaching. Reach out to us if you want to collaborate on anything, and reach out to us if you want more information on the executive education course or the new projects, because we don't have the information up on the website yet. It's all coming. So thank you everyone for joining us. Follow us on social media. Keep up with the NORAC website. Register as a NORAC member, and you will be directly receiving information about NORAC activities in the future. Thank you.